Join me today as we talk about the HBO miniseries Chernobyl. This is the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bobbie, and today we're going to be talking about the HBO miniseries Chernobyl. Came out a few years ago, I think 2019 is what the IMDb says. I started seeing a bunch of clips from it on YouTube in the shorts, and kind of similar to what got me to convince me to watch Lucifer, and also remember a bunch of good things from the Doctor Who shows, because I've rewatched, like, at this point, probably a couple seasons just in the clips. And also, it's convinced me I should probably watch the Peter Capaldi run, because I tapped out just after Matt Smith took over. You know, it had been a few years I've been watching it, so it seemed like it was a good time to jump ship. From what we're seeing from the clips, I should probably go through the Matt Smith episodes, and definitely the Capaldi episodes. Probably going to stop at Jodie Whittaker, though. So anyway, this is a series about the nuclear incident at Chernobyl back in the 80s. So, definitely a spotlight on commie incompetence, which I could probably just make a channel dedicated to that very topic, but really don't like to, because I don't like to talk about politics. But I will knock the commies all day long. So anyway, so it's been out for a few years. It's 5 episodes. So who do we have in it? So Jared Harris plays Valery Legazov, who is the main scientist character, who is the one that ultimately convinces Gorbachev that there's a problem and it needs to be looked into, and then explains the severity of the problem and what they're going to do to fix it. Stellan Skarsgård is Boris Sherbina. Hopefully I pronounced that right. And he's the minister that gets sent with them to solve the problem. And he's the one that, while he's skeptical every step of the way, once he realizes what the gravity of the situation is, he gets everything they need to solve the problems. So he's a very crucial character. And then we have Emily Watson, who plays Ulana Komuk, I believe is how her name is pronounced. Now, they did say in the final final episode after the show ends, has like several minutes of, well, here's where they are now kind of things for the various characters and some of the things that were discussed. They did say that her character is a made-up character. She's meant to be a composite of the team of scientists that were working for Legazov for the dramatic purposes. You know, they wanted to just have the single character. Now, in case you didn't recognize any of those names, Jared Harris, the main other thing I saw him in is he played Professor Moriarty in the second Sherlock Holmes movie with Robert Downey Jr. Game of Shadows, I think is the name of it, or something like that. Stellan Skarsgård is Baron Vladimir Harkonnen in the 2 newer Dune movies. Also plays scientist whose name completely escapes me at the moment in the Thor movies and the first Avengers. And it bothers me I can't remember his name, but we're going to move on. Then Emily Watson is in the newer Dune TV series that was on HBO, and she plays the main the lead member of the Bene Gesserit, and she's a Harkonnen. Then it's been a while, but I think she played Christian Bale's wife in Equilibrium, if I remember correctly, if I'm visualizing the right person. But she's in some other things, and it was almost a night and day performance there. Like, I wasn't super keen on her in the Dune series, and not that she was acting wrong or anything. Like, I just assumed that's the way the character was, and so I don't know, it's probably just rubbed me the wrong way. but like definitely like night and day in terms of characters here. So probably a better actress than I gave her credit for is what I'm trying to say. So anyway, so what's it about? Well, in case you don't know history or in case you weren't alive during the 80s, the nuclear reactor Chernobyl suffered a catastrophic meltdown and explosion, and it's credited, and it even mentions this in the credits, that Gorbachev, who was the final premier of the Soviet Union, if I'm remembering correctly, I don't think it was Yeltsin, I believe it was Gorbachev, and he basically said that, you know, this was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. In a lot of ways it was, because it forced people to confront the fact that the whole Soviet system was corrupt from top to bottom, and that appearances were more important than facts. Things were hidden because they just didn't go with the narrative, and it cost people their lives and could have potentially killed tens of millions of people as a result. So, and also it forced them to, this was from what I've seen elsewhere, this wasn't in the show. In the show, there's a bunch of military personnel and equipment that shows up. Well, a lot of that apparently came from Afghanistan, that they were in the middle of invading at the time. And we were in the middle of funding the insurgency at the time. So that proved to be a critical detriment to Afghanistan, which eventually was a loss, which also contributed to destroying the facade of the invincible Soviet Empire. So, you know, it's just a couple of big things there. And then the wall fell, and next thing you know, that's it. No more Soviet Union. So, excuse me. Although that does come up a little bit in the end, this is about the reactor and all that. So, for those of you that don't know how it all happened, okay, so crash course in how a nuclear reactor works here. Essentially, you have uranium, a radioactive element, inside of a tank. There's a lot of water, and then there are also control rods, which are, as uranium decays, it releases neutrons. Now, these neutrons fire out at very high speed, and if they strike another uranium atom, that uranium atom will split in half into two lesser atoms and fire out three more neutrons. So the more densely packed the material is, the greater the likelihood of one of those neutrons hitting another atom, and so on and so on. And if you get anywhere above one neutron hitting one of the three hitting another atom, you get to an exponential reaction, because if it breaks apart, if all three of those hit another atom, and all three of those hit another atom, and so on, each step of the way, you have 3 times as much energy being released. And in no time, you have a runaway chain reaction. So, it's very similar to how a bomb works, but I'm not going to get into that. So, the control rods, their job is to absorb the neutrinos to prevent the large-scale reaction. So they're made of a material that will absorb them. Plus the water absorbs a certain amount, and plus there's the fact that there shouldn't be what they call a critical mass in there. So you have all this happening. So what they wanted to know was, okay, I guess, so a few more steps, sorry, I'm trying to skip steps here. So what that does is that generates heat, which turns the water to steam, which turns turbines, which turn giant magnets inside of copper coils, which generates electricity. It's basically how every electric power plant works, more or less. It's just a matter of how you heat the water into steam. I mean, there's a few exceptions, like with wind, it's just the turbine is the propellers, so that's how that's spinning. And in a hydroelectric, it's the water flowing through and letting gravity do the job to spin the turbines. So So you have all the water, you have the control rods, then you have all these parts. Well, most power plants, or at least nuclear power plants, have an outside power source for the power plant. It's not powered by the electricity it's generating. I'm assuming this is just in case anything goes wrong. So what they wanted to know was, well, if the outside power were to be cut through a disaster, or if we, the West, decided to start bombing the Soviet Union or something, could the electricity being generated by the turbine there at the plant actually power shutting down the reactor? Because to shut it down, you got to put the control rods into it. Otherwise, the reaction just keeps going. And they had diesel generators on site, but they said this took 60 seconds to power up. And that's 59 seconds too long, because you're talking particles moving almost at the speed of light. So, like, it can literally, in a second, and you're done. So, for reference, from everything I've ever read, the reaction in a bomb of this kind takes roughly 1/8 of a second once it's triggered. You go from a titanium cased rocket to a gigantic mushroom cloud. So now a nuclear reactor, like I said, shouldn't have critical mass, so it shouldn't actually be able to cause a nuclear explosion. But it can cause an explosion, as they found out. So they're preparing for the test. They bring the power down, and it drops too far down, so they try to bring it back up, and they're hell-bent on doing the test. So they set up everything. They basically pushed the reactor to the point that it could have melted down or exploded or something all on its own. And then, like, the reaction took off, because for the test, they shut the things down that were restraining the reaction, and they had turned all the accelerants up to try to bring it back up to speed. So then it started to go, and they hit the button that's supposed to scram the reactor, which should have plunged all the control rods in. And what they didn't know was that the tips of the control rods were the same metal that can accelerate the reaction. And so they jammed in and then stopped. And at that point, it just became a runaway reaction. So, as I noted in the show, the high-end output for the reactor was supposed to be 3 megawatts, and the last recorded number before everything exploded was 30 megawatts. And the various comments I've seen surrounding it, people theorize it probably actually reached 100 megawatts. So, gigawatts. Yeah, it's gigawatts. So in other words, anywhere from 10 to 30 some odd times what it's supposed to produce. And that created the explosion in the main tank, which fired the roof off the tank. The roof weighed somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 tons and blew it out through the top of the building, with parts of the reactor flying right behind it, and set the roof on fire and everything else. So that's the actual incident. So the rest of the show is trying to put out the fire, then trying to stop the meltdown, and then realizing that, like, every step of the way, that there's some other problem they didn't foresee, that they're going to have some other potential calamity. There was a couple of different ways that this whole thing could have just been an infinitely worse disaster, which, like I said, would have ended up killing probably tens of millions of people and decimating some huge chunk of Central Asia. So it's obviously a good thing that didn't happen. So from there, as the show progresses, you get to see, like I mentioned, the aforementioned commie incompetence at every step of the way. Like, whenever the 3 guys nominally in charge of everything are discussing what's happened, first of all, they don't believe the reactor's exploded. They think it's just a fire. And the main guy in charge is like, well, what happened? And the guy around there is like, well, we did everything like this guy said to do. And he's like, well, yeah, I'm sure you did, but you were the one in charge. And so they're just constantly trying to pass the buck because they know worst case scenario one of them's going to get shot over this. Because that's the way things rolled in the Soviet Union. And they destroyed the people's property. So they just keep constantly trying to pass the buck. No one's taking any kind of blame whatsoever. And which means they also don't want to face the reality of what's happened. And they keep being like, oh, it's things are only reading like I think it's 3.3 Romkin. And everyone up to that point in the show is like, well, it's not great, but it's not bad. So then we are introduced to Legazov's character, and the moment he hears that, he's like, well, that's not good. And so you know that they're already lying, but the reason they keep throwing out that number is that's all the higher their meters will register. As you find out later, the more accurate device they bring in says it's over 15,000. So, yeah. Then you see like the high-level meetings with Gorbachev, and even there, people aren't wanting to acknowledge what's happened until Legazov like is reading the report to him, is like trying to explain like, hey, so right here on this page it mentions this guy picked up this black rock and it burned his hand. And he's like, that's graphite. That's from inside the reactor. Like, the reactor has exploded. We have to go there and figure out what's going on, because they're lying to us. So they go, and Legazov has to explain to Sherbina how the reactor works and everything. And as they're getting closer, Sherbina wants to go over, like, fly over top of the reactor in the helicopter they're in. And Legazov looks at the plant and is like, oh, we can't do that. You know, he's like, look at that. The thing's exploded. And Sherbina's like, well, let's go over it. Legazov's like, no, don't you see that the light coming out of that? That's the radiation ionizing the air. The core is exposed. He's like, that's high radiation, making the air glow. It's like, that's not supposed to happen. And it's like Sherbina threatens the pilot. He's like, fly us over, we're going to shoot it. Legazov's like, you do that, this time tomorrow, you're going to be praying for that bullet, and we're all going to be dead within a week. So the pilot listens to the scientist, so they go land, and they immediately figure out that the people on the ground are just passing the buck. No one knows what happened. They're not going to take any responsibility. And then that's the beginning of seeing the other side of the Russians, the people that will do what has to be done. They explain that they need better readings. They're going to put a device on the front of a truck, and they're explaining to the military commander there. And they're like, you have to tell your man that we're going to do what we can for the truck, but it might not be enough. As in, like, he's probably going to suffer a lethal dose of radiation. And so the military commander's like, well, then I'll do it myself. And that's a rare thing, and you see it in some other people throughout the show. There's, like I said, I can trash talk comedies all day long, but some of the people there, they were made of some pretty stern stuff. And it happens again later when they got to get some divers to go underground to shut off or to open up some water tanks. And they're trying to tell them, well, whoever goes, we're going to do this and this. And one guy real pointedly is like, well, what's that going to matter? Like, we're going to die. And so Sherbina gets up and tells him, is like, look, what separates us Russians from everyone else is the thousands of years of sacrificing for the greater good. Like, this is what we do, He's like, so 3 of you are going to go in there. And so then 3 guys volunteer. And you find out at the end that 2 of the 3 of them are actually still alive, which is surprising. Because they even said that it's commonly reported that they were all dead, but they said no, 2 of the 3 of them are actually still alive. And then the woman's character, Ilona Komyuk, like I said, is a composite character. She finds out because her assistant comes in, and they're at a college like 400 miles away, 400 kilometers away, and he opens up the window, and all of a sudden they've got a thing that measures radiation. It starts going off the charts. Shuts the window again. They test it, and it's coming up to 8 Romkin. And she's like, well, that's not good. And so, like, she calls the nearest nuclear plant to see if there's been some kind of accident. And they say they're fine. Well, the second closest one is Chernobyl, and she can't get a hold of them. She's like, well, it can't be. Like, that's, he's like 400 kilometers away. She's like, the core would have to be exposed. And, well, it is. And that's how the rest of the world found out, was that places in Europe began detecting high levels of radiation just in the air, and they were able to figure out that it was coming from a Soviet reactor. So yeah, those are just some anecdotes. I mean, it's a whole 5 episodes, and the lengths people that knew what they were going into were willing to go to, like the miners who had to go underground. They knew what it was probably going to mean. At one point, Sherbina asks Legazov what's going to happen to the guys that were there fighting the fire and everything, and he's like, they're dead men walking. Like, they suffered, they got hit with so much radiation, like their genetics are going to break down. They're just going to fall apart. It's going to be very horrible for them, and they're going to die very soon. And then he's like, not like you and me. We didn't suffer that kind of dose. We'll be dead within 5 years of cancer, though. And the look on Sherbina's face, Legazov realizes that he didn't realize just how much they'd been exposed to already. And he realized that was the first time he'd even considered that was going to happen. And he's like, well, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you didn't know that. And then towards the end, there's a really good scene at the trial for the 3 guys that I mentioned. They're kind of passing the buck around. And Legazov is going to tell everyone what happened and why, and basically explain that, while they're responsible for setting up the scenario, the critical piece of information they didn't have is because the KGB classified it so that the Soviet Union wouldn't look bad. So the system is partially to blame. And before he does that, Sherbina's having a coughing fit, so they take a recess. They're walking outside. And Sherbina mentions, he's like, I always, like, whenever they told me that I was going to be in charge of this, I assumed it wasn't important. Legazov's like, because they gave it to you? He goes, yeah. He's like, I didn't matter. He's like, I always wanted to matter, but I never did. And then I get assigned this, and he's like, I'm just here beside the people that really did matter. He looks at Legazov, and Legazov's like, Boris is like, any other scientist could have done what I did. He's like, no one else could have done what you did. No one could have gotten me 5,000 tons of boron and sand. No one could have gotten me the lunar rovers that we needed a remote to pilot it, to clear off the roof. He's like, you were the most important person here, Boris. He's like, they made a mistake. They sent the one man who actually cared. And because there's a moment where Boris finally is like, he's done with the crap of the committees and the lies and everything else. And he goes on a rant on the phone, and you only hear his end of the conversation. He's like, of course I know they're listening. I don't give a shit. He's like going on. He's like, you can tell Gorbachev himself. And he just smashes the phone and walks outside. And like, you see that everyone clearly knew what happened. And he's like, well, now they know, or something like that. He looks at the technician, I'm going to need a new phone. So, but yeah, it's an excellent show. Like I said, it's only 5 episodes. Excellent acting all throughout. Skarsgård and Harris in particular, give great performances. The guy that they got to play Gorbachev doesn't look the most convincingly like Gorbachev, I'm not going to lie. But, is, still well acted. The head of the KGB, the guy who played him, did a really good job. You could tell he was like, if he said so, like, you were just going to disappear down a hole, never to be found again. Yeah, but just, like I said, well acted all throughout. The people that you're supposed to hate, like you do, just because of just, calming incompetence. And, yeah, then you see what happens to everybody at the end. And I'm not going to go into the details of all their fates. Now, the show did come out before hostilities began in Ukraine here recently, in the last few years. So, some people obviously were living in Ukraine at the end of the show, as of the update 2019. No idea if they went back to Russia, if they consider themselves Russians or Ukrainians or anything at all like that. But overall, excellent show, definitely worth checking out. And if you've never seen anything else about it, there's some shows on the History Channel about it that are pretty interesting, that detail what actually happened, and talk about the sarcophagus, the giant building they've had to build around the reactor, and that also detail that sooner or later that's going to have to be replaced because the thing's still giving off all kinds of radiation. There's still a huge area around they don't let people live in. Although I have seen a thing where there's some people that do still live there, and in some of the side stuff, like there's an episode where a big part of the episode is the units they had to send around to shoot all the animals because they were irradiated. They couldn't let them leave the zone, and so they're literally going out shooting like cats and dogs and pets and everything, and just the the strength of will that would take, or the people that are having to go round up the people to get them out of there. And there's a stubborn old woman, a soldier comes in and she's like, look, I was alive during the revolution. Like, I saw the Tsar's guys, I saw the Bolsheviks, and then I saw the Germans during World War II. I lost brothers along the way, cousins, parents. She's like, I survived Stalin. I survived all these things. I survived the Holodomor. She's like, I'm not leaving. Like, and there's nothing you can threaten me with, like, that hasn't already been tried, like, 10 times over. And the soldier in frustration, like, shoots her cow. And it's just, as well as, like, that's the kind of people that the Germans couldn't break at Stalingrad. Again, I can crap talk the commies, but, like, there's some of them that they are just made of something else. And, yeah. Yeah, so anyway, excellent show. Definitely worth a watch. Like I said, it's only 5 episodes. They're around an hour each. I think the whole show might take you 6 hours because the last episode's kind of long. But definitely worth a watch. If you got HBO Max, it's probably also on DVD or Blu-ray, I think. If so, I'll have a link for the Amazon thing down in the description. But yeah, so can't recommend it highly enough. This is like a 9.5, and mostly conformed to everything I've ever heard about the incident from like the History Channel and stuff. So as far as I know, the science is right on it, and because it is, like I said, the one character is acknowledged to be fake, composite, and so I'm sure there are elements of dramatization, because it is a show, but it was supposed, I think the whole purpose was to, one, show that, communism sucks, and here's why, and it gives you several great examples, but also that Asia and Europe and possibly other chunks of the planet dodged a bullet. And rightfully placed the blame on incompetence. It wasn't anti-nuclear. It was definitely like this kind of thing should have never been allowed to happen. So, I didn't take it as an anti-nuclear piece. But it's well acted, well written, and like I said, from what I understand, most of it's accurate, so definitely worth checking out. So anyway, that's about all I got. So let me know what you guys think. Did you watch it? It's been out for about 5-6 years now. I didn't realize it'd been out that long. But, let me know down in the comments if you've seen it before, interested in seeing it, a lot about the whole Chernobyl incident. Yeah, anything at all like that, let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, like, share, subscribe. Sharing and commenting are the things that help us grow the most, and we always appreciate it. And we're, as of now, kind of closing in on 500 subscribers, so, here's hoping. But yeah, that's about all I've got, folks. So just remember, don't push a nuclear reactor to the brink of destruction and think that the scram button's going to save your ass, I guess. До свидания.